So we are up to page 85 in the middle of chapter 8. And we were discussing last time about what is called das. And we said that das means essentially an inner knowledge, which means something that is so almost inherent to who we are as a human being that it will actually, when we understand what it is, it's going to help us to understand what a human being is. And there are certain things that a human being does, that a person does, which are not essential to who we are. And it can actually be done, the same thing can be done even better potentially by a robot or nowadays by AI. And then there are other parts which is actually so essential to who we are. And he puts this by explaining that there are two parts to the mind. There's the inner part and the outer part, if you like. The outer part is the part that we do everything that is where we work with this world, and those are the things which the machine could sort of duplicate as well. Whereas our consciousness and the inner part of ourselves, he calls the inner eye or the inner mind. And that is the part which is the das. And he ended off by saying that the das is actually intimate knowledge. Marriage is defined as is explained in the Torah as das. Vayeda Adam es ishto. It says that Adam knew his wife, which means that Adam has this intimate relationship with his wife. They produce a child together. That's described as das. So das is that intimate connection, the essence of connection. Continuing at the top of page 85. What are the elements which this das holds, meaning this inner mind? What does it hold? A brief consideration shows that they are all the things which are most important in one's inner life. Some of the components of das are the knowledge of one's own existence. This is the primary knowledge of the das. Then the knowledge of the present, the knowledge of one's own free will, the grasp that life has meaning, the grasp of intrinsic right and wrong, and ultimately the das is the vessel of consciousness of a transcendent reality, i.e., understanding that there is something which is beyond, the spiritual reality which is beyond our physical world. Now, all of those things, you might see, what they have in common is, these are things which are so intrinsic to us as a human being, yet they are not something which can be sort of tested or even necessarily proven in a laboratory. You know, there are philosophers who've written whole books on the subject of one's own existence and how one can prove that one actually exists, right? I don't know much philosophy, but Descartes, am I pronouncing that correctly, Mum? I know how to spell it. You're right? He said famously, I think I might get this, let's see if I get it right. I think, therefore I am. I think that was his conclusion, right? That's the line that many people remember. But he's probably got books and books and books, all trying to understand this point, which built up to kind of that conclusion, though. And essentially, what Rabbi Tatz is saying here is that actually these things are so primary and essential to who we are as a human being that these are things which are actually contained within our das, within our knowledge. Free will is another one. Free will is another thing which it's clear and obvious to a person that they have a free will. They have the ability to choose between right and wrong. And another one, there is right and wrong. There is intrinsic right and wrong, this idea of there being right and wrong. I have to say, when you read this list, you see that over the years, there have been people who have argued, disputed, philosophized about these things, although ultimately, I think every human being in the world knows deep down within themselves, which is what we would call the das, that's inner mind, they know that all of these things are true and that these things do exist. And as he says, ultimately, that consciousness and the knowledge that there is a transcendent reality, that there is being, that there is a creator of the world. He says in brackets, the mystics say that this is really an expansion of the most primary knowledge of the das, that I exist, as one of Hashem's name is Ani, the infinite I. Okay, let's continue. An examination of this list will show that although these issues are certainly critically important to the concept of being human, they cannot be proved, as we said. Although one knows them most profoundly, they cannot be put into words. No matter how much one professes the reality of morality, an obstinate skeptic is free to deny it, as some people do. No one has yet formally proved that I exist. This is the oldest problem in philosophy. I think, therefore I am does not mean that my existence is proved because my brain functions physiologically. That is no more proof than the physiology of any other bodily organ. It is simply a basic statement of the das. I know I am, therefore I am, is really what it means. Meaning even that statement really comes back to the fact that I know I exist, therefore I do. Of course, since there are no words for the issues of the das, it must simply be stated as I think, therefore, and an initiate will understand. So essentially, what we're saying is that there are certain things which are so obvious and basic to who we are as a human being, yet those things cannot be proven, and that's okay, because those are the things that are contained within the das or within our inner mind. He continues at the bottom of 85. The dilemma is obvious. How are all these areas to be examined, refined, and elevated in the mind if they cannot be proven or expressed? How can one begin to think about them logically? The answer is simple and staggering. Just as the external mind must be used to grasp those things which are accessible to it, the das itself must be used for its material. Meaning we've got to use our inner mind. One must never attempt to use the one mode for the material of the other. And the most striking illustration of this, right, Desta explains the external mind is like a camera. A camera can take a picture of anything in the world except the camera itself. Very interesting. The camera cannot be turned in on itself without breaking. The outer mind's logical, arithmetical, finite eye can never be focused on the inner zone. It must always be focused outwards at the external world, and the raw, intrinsic, wholesome faculty of das must be used to grasp its own existence and facets. Meaning that if we try to use our outer mind, which is used to grappling with the physical world and the logical problems that this world presents, and we try to use that in order to understand the inner mind, then we're using the wrong tool. We're using the wrong tool for it. I was having a conversation today with in a class where we were discussing about the transmitting the Torah. And we were speaking about the fact that originally the Torah was given as some of it written and some of it oral, in order that it could be transmitted from teacher to student. Because there are many things that you need the nuances and the subtlety of explaining it, and it needs to be given over from teacher to student. And one of the girls was sort of, she wasn't very happy about this whole concept. And I said to her, what subjects are you studying for A-level? So she said she's doing biology, chemistry, and physics. She's a very scientific mind. And I said to her that the challenge is, and I understand that as well, because I, also a science student in my A-level days, and the challenge is that when we are approaching the world from that sort of scientific, cold, if you like, logical perspective, then it's hard to understand why would anything need to be as nuanced as something that needs to be transmitted or can only be transmitted, if you like, in person. And it can't be just read in a book and understood from the information that is, kind of there and out there and the logical information. And the answer is because, again, it's like this outer mind versus inner mind. So the outer mind stuff, the logical, explanation of how the world works and etc. And there are parts of Judaism like that as well. That can all be understood with the outer mind. But you're always going to have a certain part which you need to understand using, if you like, a different set of tools, using the inner mind. And that doesn't mean it's less logical or anything. It just means that we are using accessing a part of ourselves, a part of our mind, which we all know exists and we all use anyway to determine and to discern things. But we need to actually realize that that is what we're doing, that we're using that tool correctly. He continues, I know I exist intrinsically, axiomatically. I don't need any particularly sensory input to be aware that I exist. I simply know it most profoundly and powerfully. One who cannot feel, taste, hear, see, or smell is most certainly not without consciousness of his own existence. Meaning, even if we took away all of our senses, we would still be conscious we exist. All the contents of the da'as are known thus. They are first principle. If proof is attempted, then it collapses. Let's continue. He's going to explain a little bit more these differences between the inner and the outer mind. There are certain exercises that can be used to grasp this distinction between the inner and the outer. One of these is common to young people. Most adolescents look up to the sky and wonder, where does it end? The common result of this is the following private inner dialogue. It doesn't end, it goes on forever. But then you say it's impossible. There must be an end somewhere, page 87. Of course there's an end. And then you say, but what's beyond that? There must be something beyond, and so on and so forth. This is an example of the rapid oscillation between the inner and outer modes alternately. The da'as, that's the inner mind, is comfortable with infinity. But the outer wisdom cannot handle that idea. It immediately challenges this inner mind by trying to analyze it, right? Where does it end? Of course it can't. The camera breaks and the das is free until the camera, right, meaning the outer mind, recovers and tries again. Isn't this a common experience when one attempts to think about the divine, when we try to think about Hashem himself? The classic experience which frees the das, the inner mind, is abject terror. If a person is traveling by aircraft, for example, philosophically pondering whether or not he exists, and the aircraft suddenly begins to shake violently, it's impossible at that moment to dismiss the notion of one's existence. In fact, the only consciousness at that moment is, don't let me die, or my child, which is an extension of the same emotion. Fear paralyzes the outer faculty and a rich experience of one's existence remains, which is why, by the way, sometimes with that near-death experience, a person will come away and they will feel so profoundly connected to who they really are. And sometimes a newfound goal, newfound mission in life. You've probably heard at some point, a story of a person who had a near-death experience and that turned everything around. Because actually what happened with that near-death experience is they experienced the das, the inner mind. They've truly, really connected to what was important within themselves and within their mind, because the outer mind just completely stopped. It was paralyzed by that near-death experience. And that's when a person says, oh, hang on a minute, there's a lot more in here. There are things which are so important to me that I didn't realize, that I didn't connect to, that I didn't actually make into my mission and my goal in life. And that's what's happening with those situations. He says, equally powerful is the ecstasy of being alive, felt for a few moments after a person is in mortal danger. A sage once described the experience of being drawn under the waves until he lost consciousness. At that moment, he breaks the surface and gasps life-saving breath of air. That was the breath of pure das, of the inner mind. It's the way he described this consciousness of being alive when that was critically held in the balance. Continue on to page 88. A direct building of this das, meaning we can actually grow, develop our inner mind, is true meditation. Here too, the words are necessarily misleading. Those who understand meditation teach one must switch off the mind in order to meditate. This instruction, like all das experiences, clumsily puts into words, is exactly the opposite of what an initiate understands. Switching off the mind is not meditation, it is unconsciousness. Relaxing perhaps, but it's not meditation. Meditation is a switching on of the mind, but of course these words are meaningless, so the instruction is to switch off. However, what is meant is to switch off the external mind, which is exactly the way to activate the inner mind. Since the two are by definition in conflict, the das, the inner mind, seeks to transcend the outer, seeking to hold into the finite. The battle must be stopped before the inner knowledge can flourish. And all this is actually obvious. It must simply be recognized. Meaning, when a person meditates, which I have to say is not a pastime of mine, but then you can appreciate what is happening is that essentially one's quietening the outer mind. And again, one connects to something which is deep inside, which you didn't necessarily even realize or know is deep inside of yourself, and that is that das, that's that inner intimate knowledge. To a lesser extent, we do it on Shabbos, because Shabbos quietens down all of those things that we're involved in, and if you like, our outer mind isn't really working in the same way that it is the rest of the week. We don't need to think about all those things we're thinking about the rest of the week. Once that has quietened down, then we're able to connect a lot more to the inner mind, and a person starts thinking about what's truly important. Who am I really? What type of person do I really want to be? All of those things are das. Those things are connecting to one's inner mind. He continues, 88. In fact, the relationship between inner and outer wisdom is deep. Their modes are in conflict, but they are bonded to each other. Some thought shows even the external facts are not just registered in machine-like fashion. Once they're registered, they are grasped and understood as part of our consciousness on page 89. In other words, external facts which are logical and amenable to proof and expressible in finite terms, but they can enter from the external mind into the das, into the inner mind, until we know them intimately. The das, the inner mind, makes the difference between registering a fact and understanding it. A classic experience is grappling with a problem for hours, not seeing the solution, or sometimes having the solution but not understanding or connecting with it. Then typically one gives up, goes to sleep. Very often you awake the next morning and think, I've got it, I understand. Although it could be another time, but it comes to you when you're least expecting it sometimes, the solution to a problem that you've been grappling with. The mystical sources explain this happens because the powerful logical thoughts shrinks the inner mind, the das. but sleep stills the driving of the logic, the limited and das, that inner mind takes over. It is because one stopped thinking about the problem that one understood it. Words are inadequate here. One who has experienced this will need no words. Again, it's an experience. I mean, many times I've sort of been thinking about something, or something is bothering me or niggling me. I don't exactly know why. And then suddenly, they call it in Yiddish an Einfeld. It drops in. Just, like then, when you're not thinking about it, and you're like, that's exactly it. I've got it. I've got it. That's what's bothering me. That's what's wrong here. That's what the solution is. That's what needs to be done. And again, that's the das. That's the inner mind working on it. Being human requires both faculties: external information gleaned from interaction with the world and analyzed by the calculator or computer part of the brain, and the inner grasp, which no machine can ever do. Information without the grasping and understanding is not human. Understanding without information is impossible. Bonding must occur to something. This is what the Mishnah means. Imein das ein bina, imein bina ein das. If there's no das, that's the inner knowledge, there is no bina, logical or analytical knowledge. If there is no bina, no logical, analytical, then there is no inner knowledge as well. This means one cannot have even the least amount of either without the other. They must always be acquired simultaneously. Page 90. It's this bonding of inner and outer wisdom which is the beauty of the mind, and the inner marriage which is the core of our being. When the two bond correctly, the outer wisdom, remaining under control, subjecting its input to the grasp of the das, the inner mind understands the outer wisdom, then the thinking is fruitful. Only when the male and female elements of thought blend can fertile, creative thought energy be generated. This is the secret of the bar mitzvah. The child acquires das when his body becomes fertile, meaning there's a point at which a person is able to connect the outer mind to the inner mind, which is when a person becomes bar or bas mitzvah. To use the terms of our pattern, the outer mind is the lower and finite. Inner mind, the das, is higher, essentially human and unlimited. The lower faculty is relatively easy to train and develop. The higher faculty is a lifetime's challenge. That is our challenge. To rise above the finite, mechanical, and open wide the faculty of das, to begin with the simple and profound awareness of I am, and strive towards sensing the higher existence, towards knowing that existence, meaning of Hashem, essentially and intrinsically. That is the purpose of das, this inner knowledge, the vessel of real knowledge. And that is why AI will never replace human beings. As long as human beings remember who they are, as long as people remember that they are not just made to do maths, and they are not just made to serve on a shop floor and to do the tasks that, not to put those things down, which we have to do as well. That's part of it. That's part of the outer knowledge in the brain and the intelligence that Hashem gave us. But if that's all we are as human beings, if there is no awareness of a sense of morality, of a sense of right and wrong, of an appreciation of the transcendent, of the creator, of my existence and my consciousness, if there is no existence of that, then unfortunately we've forgotten what it means to have that inner mind. We're so disconnected from it. And he ends off, the final redemption and revelation will be a revelation of das, of this inner mind. Knowledge of this higher reality of Hashem is the purpose of existence. The Rambam states, the purpose of the world's creation was to form an ummah sheyodea es Hashem, a nation which knows Hashem. That's that knowledge, that inner knowledge. Kimalahar, it's there, the earth will be filled with real knowledge for the time of Mashiach. Haskel v'yodoyasi, become wise and know me. We must open that vessel of the neshama, which can be filled with knowledge. A sage of this generation has said that we dare not allow ourselves to be so deficient in our das and our inner knowledge that we cannot merit the Rahmanas we so desperately need, the mercy, the love. If we open this vessel, then it will be filled. Maybe very appropriate to end on that note. Pesach is the birth of the Jewish people, the birth of Am Yisrael. As he says, the purpose of all existence is that there should be a nation which knows Hashem, a nation which lives with the intimate knowledge that there is a creator of the world, that no matter what happens to us, that we are able to stand strong, we're able to know who we are, what our identity is, what our mission is in this world. That is an incredible thing. And you see this, you see this at the most, I would say the times, maybe sometimes the hardest times for the Jewish people, when we're stripped of everything else. It's like that near-death experience and the paralysis of the outer mind. And you see the collective inner mind of the Jewish people, and as individuals as well, you see the strength of that inner mind, that inner das, that inner knowledge. That is the birth of the Jewish people that we're celebrating at Pesach. It's not just a group of people who do things differently, think about things in a different way. It's a group of people who are connected to those most essential parts of what being a human being is. And the idea being that we should be an Or LaGoyim, we should be a light to other nations. They will look at us, they will realize, they will understand what that is. I have to say, last night, I actually spoke and was an aide, a witness at a wedding of a ger and a geras, two people who just joined the Jewish people. The person who actually played the music, who did it for free very kindly, said this was his second one that week. Second wedding of two converts that week, which was quite incredible. These are people who have seen what we're doing as Jewish people, have seen the beauty of it. They've decided that they want to make this their life. They want to join, they want to make it their lives. So Pesach is a time for us to appreciate the beauty of what we have, and once again, to be able to embrace with renewed energy that mission, connecting to that inner mind that all of us have inside of us. We will stop there. Thank you.